Common sources of food safety problems are listed here on the screen. The first three, inefficient employee hygiene practices, ineffective employee training, and language barriers, are the three most common sources of food safety problems, and they go together. Language barriers in training, especially when the trainers only speak English and the employees only speak another language, leads to very ineffective employee training and means employees don't understand the rules and expectations that are laid out for them by the company. And when employees don't understand the importance or correct procedures for hygiene, they often perform inefficient hygiene practices, including hand washing, coming to work with clean clothing, and proper care of their aprons and gloves. The other sources of food safety problems can also be linked to language barriers and ineffective employee training, such as the accumulation of biofilms in the workplace. This is often caused by ineffective use of cleaning agents and disinfectants, and again, this is usually due to employees not fully understanding the proper procedures or the importance of correct dilutions of the chemicals. When we think about personnel and food safety problems, we need to think about the human factor. If the rules are too complicated or not explained well, employees tend not to follow them. Also, if people are established in their position, they start to modify the way they do their job to make it easier, and often they don't consider the food safety impact. The number one GMP for personnel is to keep sick employees away from food and food contact equipment. So if someone has been identified as having an illness, an open lesion, an infected wound, or any other possible source of microbial contamination on their body, they should be prevented from any activities that could lead to the contamination of food or food contact equipment. So who decides if someone is sick? A doctor or nurse is obviously someone who can decide if someone is too sick to come into work. If they've been diagnosed with an illness or a contagious condition, they need to be kept out of the work area. Also, supervisors should observe the employee's behavior and pull anyone off the line that shows sores, lesions, or symptoms of an illness. And finally, the employee should be on the honor system to know when they're sick and report their illness to their supervisor and not go into the work area. The second GMP is to always practice good personal hygiene. Employees should always wear clean outer garments, maintain personal cleanliness, and wash their hands thoroughly throughout the day. Some additional GMPs for personnel would be to remove all unsecured jewelry that might fall into the food to avoid physical contamination. Remove rings when handling product. While they are unlikely to fall off, they can harbor bacteria and other microorganisms. And if gloves are used, maintain them in clean condition. They should wear their hair restraints correctly, fully containing all of their hair within their hairnets. They should store personal items in designated storage areas away from the food handling areas, and not eat, drink, chew gum, or use tobacco or electronic cigarettes in the food handling areas. In addition to having these GMPs, it's important that the employees are trained and properly supervised. It's the responsibility of the company to make sure that employees and supervisors are properly trained to be able to do their jobs, including supervisors getting additional training on how to recognize symptoms and signs of illness. Employees who monitor the facility for sanitation need to have the background or experience to be able to recognize that small issues can lead to significant consequences and be able to tell telltale signs when equipment has not been properly cleaned. The employees who directly handle the product should be trained in the company's preferred techniques. This is especially important if product is directly handled by hand. All employees in food handling areas should be trained in food protection principles, including personal hygiene and proper hand washing. Supervisors need to be designated so the company can make sure that those employees receive the additional training they need, and so employees know who to report an issue to. If supervisors change on a regular basis, it should be clearly announced whenever there's a change so that employees are always aware who the supervisor of the day is. GMPs are the company's philosophy on food safety, and they're very vague. There's often more detail needed to make a good program. You can add to your program policies, which are specific statements as to how the GMPs will be enforced, procedures, which are the company-approved way to make sure that the policies are being followed, and logs, which provide records showing that the policies and GMPs are being followed, or not. If policies and GMPs are not being followed, the log should show what kind of discipline measures or corrective actions were taken. Some other policies might be needed for personnel issues, such as a disciplinary policy, an employee training policy detailing how frequently employees are trained, employee hygiene and cleanliness policy saying what the minimum standards for cleanliness and hygiene are, glove and protective clothing, whether or not gloves are mandatory or optional, and whether or not aprons are mandatory or optional, jewelry and personal effects, instructing employees not to bring their jewelry or personal items into the work area, hair covering policies, and other policies. So this brings up the question of how do you write a policy? Basically, you just state in a few sentences what the expectation of the company is. The policy should be very easy to understand and should be available in the languages that the employees can read. If the employees are not fluent in English, the policies should be made available in a language that they can read, such as Spanish, Chinese, Tagalog, or whatever languages are appropriate. It's important to keep it simple, so here's an example of a disciplinary policy. Who does the policy apply to? All employees. What is the expectation? The employee must follow company good manufacturing practices, policies, and procedures. Where does this policy apply? On company premises. When? At all times. Why does this matter? So you don't get written up and possibly fired. So here we have it in sentence form. All employees must follow company good manufacturing practices, policies, and procedures at all times while on company premises. Observed infractions will be written up in the employee's file and may be grounds for disciplinary actions and eventual dismissal. An SOP, or a standard operating procedure, gives even more information to the employees. Sometimes a policy doesn't fully explain to the employees what the company expects them to do, and so a standard operating procedure takes them step by step through this process. So how do you write an SOP? We're still going to keep it simple. So we will say, what is the purpose of the SOP? Why does it exist? Who's responsible? What equipment is necessary? How frequently must it be done? What are the steps to complete it? What logs, if any, are filled out when the SOP is completed? And verification. Who double checks the logs or double checks the activities to make sure that it's being followed correctly? So here is a sample of a hand washing SOP. So the purpose of this SOP is to describe the correct hand washing procedure. That's the responsibility of all employees. The equipment necessary is clean water, soap, and clean paper towels. The frequency is before starting work, after leaving the work area for any reason, after using the restroom, after touching the floor, and any other times their hands may have been contaminated. Here's the procedure. Wet hands with clean running water. Apply soap. Rub hands vigorously for at least 20 seconds. Wash the palms, backs of the hands, between the fingers, and under the nails. Rinse thoroughly with clean running water. Dry hands completely using a clean paper towel. Place the used paper towel in the trash can. Anytime hands have become contaminated, leave the work area and rewash your hands following steps 1 through 6. There's no log necessary for every time employees wash their hands, but it can be helpful for supervisors to record that the employees are properly washing their hands at designated break times, such as before work begins and after lunch on the daily GMP log. And so the verification can be that the production manager reviews those daily GMP logs at least once a week. Why is it better to keep policies and procedures simple? Because if the rules are too complicated or not explained well, the employees tend not to follow them. This is also why it's important to make sure that the training is done in a simple manner and in languages that the employees understand. And then once employees are trained, you need to do monitoring and supervision. Employees will tend to change the procedures to make their jobs easier without fully considering the food safety impact. So it's the supervisor's responsibility to make sure that the company policies and procedures are always being followed. The company should also do self-audits to make sure that they are covering all of their risk factors and are made aware of changes in the risks according to employee habits. QC staff and other personnel responsible for identifying sanitation and contamination should have background or education to understand the hazards in their system. So they might need to have had special training, such as attending special workshops in food safety, HACCP training, and having multiple years on the job. The food handlers and supervisors should receive appropriate training in their food handling techniques and food protection principles, and should be informed of the danger of poor personal hygiene and unsanitary practices. So they should know that they are able to make people sick even if they personally do not feel sick if they don't properly wash their hands. The employee training program needs to be comprehensive and cover all employees, all the way from upper management all the way down to the line workers. It's important that everyone understands their role in food safety including any time someone is on the floor that they follow proper sanitation practices. This is whether they're the senior management, senior VP, someone from accounting dropping off paychecks, or someone whose job is to be on the line on a day-to-day basis. Everyone should be made aware of the company's GMPs or GAPs. They should attend HACCP training as it pertains to their job, and be aware of any SOPs that matter for their day-to-day operations. When you're conducting this training, it's important to keep a log that covers the topics trained, the name of the trainer, and the name and signature of all attendees. This will be important in documenting and proving later during an audit when and where the training took place.